Hello and welcome to the Crone Codes, a gathering place for women of all ages and all stages to remember your worth, your purpose, and your power. I'm your host, the creator and resident crone, Joan Advent. Hello and welcome back to the Crone Codes. I'm your host, the creator and resident crone, Joan Advent. I wanted to talk with you today about late bloomers and third acts in our life. I would consider myself a late bloomer. And now that I'm familiar with my human design, I can understand why that is the case. If you know anything about that model of understanding who we are as people, I am a 6 line in my profile. I'm a 2-6. And part of being a 6 line is that my full fruition of what I'm here to share with the world is not set to show up until much later in my life, actually in my 50s. And now that I am beginning the dawning of my 60s, I can see the way that it's coming in even stronger. So today, this episode is for anyone, but it's particularly for you if you are entering the third act of your life, or you are in the third act of your life, and you're wondering, do I have something to contribute? Is there more that I'm meant to do with my life? If you've had visions or dreams that have been lingering over the past few decades, is it too late? So I wanted to share some stories of women that you may have heard about and maybe some that you haven't. And also one other person who happens to be a man. I want to share a little bit of their story that I have come to understand and then just give you some reflections about that. So, I want to begin with Louise Hay. Many people are familiar with Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, and Hay House Publishing. And would it surprise you to learn that both the book and the publishing house, Hay House, both came out when she was in her late 50s, 57, 58. Just coming out of emerging from her Saturn return. And the prolific writing that she did, and really the substantial legacy and ripple effect that she created, all began in that third act of life. And it was, as it is for many of us, a distillation and a culmination of all the wisdom she had gathered up to that point. I also want to share with you, there is a book that actually I listened to as an audiobook, but that has been a foundation for me for decades. I think I found it probably in my early 40s, and the name of the book is called You're Not Old Until You're 90. Best to be prepared nonetheless. Something like that. And the author is named Rebecca Lattimer. And Rebecca Lattimer and this book came to my attention through one of Sark's books. If you're familiar with Sark, who wrote Succulent Wild Women and many, many creative and beautiful books over the years, she had mentioned Rebecca and her book, You're Not Old Until You're 90. in her book, in Sark's book. And so it inspired me. I'm not sure which of Sark's books it is mentioned in, but I have a number of them. Suffice to say, it's in one of them. And if I'm very enterprising, I will link it in the show notes. I will link Rebecca's book, but if I'm very enterprising, I will also link Sark's book as well. So, back to Rebecca. Rebecca Lattimer lived a very full life as an ambassador's wife. She raised children. She had a full life. And at the point when most people would consider retiring, in her mid-60s, she learned how to meditate. And this was in the 70s. She got heavily into following Alan Watts and that whole kind of new consciousness wave that was happening back then. So she learned to meditate, and she also began writing. And her book is this incredible story of just the rebirth, the reemergence, the kind of the new life that can often be created at that stage of life. And at 92, she was recording. She was the voice. She was the audiobook voice of her book, You're Not Old Until You're 90. And I have always found that book to be such an inspiration. And frankly, it's probably the book I have recommended most to clients. And in part because it provides a benchmark, and certainly for me, as someone who feels like a late bloomer, that it's been a benchmark for me when I have felt downcast or dispirited at what I would call feeling like a lack of progress towards this big vision or mission or purpose I felt I had for my life. I would go back and remember Rebecca Lattimer and think, I'm nowhere near 65 yet. Who knows what's going to happen or what I may create between now and then, particularly when I was in the phase of intensively in the roles of wife and mother, when I didn't have a lot of bandwidth to devote to other legacies or other creative expressions for myself. So I do highly recommend the book. If you haven't already received that recommendation from me in the past, and even if you have, it's a great one to revisit. I also want to bring up, I recently learned that Laura Ingalls Wilder published her first book and began writing. I don't know if she began writing at 65, but I know she published her first book, Little House in the Big Woods, in 1932, when she was 65 years old. And the thing I love about her story, number one, the impetus for her writing and the support for her writing actually came from her daughter. Her daughter recognized the wisdom and the gifts that Laura had, and this was during the time of the Depression, and she and her husband, Almanzo, were broke farmers. They had lost their farm during the Depression, and so they were living with their daughter, Rose, and Rose encouraged Laura to begin writing down stories or memories from her childhood. And then she also helped edit and shape and shift them from first-person narratives to third-person expressions of a story. And now, all these years later, it's $100 million franchise. And the books, her books, which took off in the hearts of families and children for 70 plus years, 80 plus years at this point, That's a series that I loved reading with my daughter, reading the entire series. I just couldn't get enough of those books. So all these years later, $100 million franchise. And before her death, which was in the 90s, just like Rebecca Lattimer, she saw considerable success. So I just want to offer that as just an inspiring story. And then finally, this is not a woman and not someone who got started in their 60s, but if you're familiar with the Moth Storytelling podcast, which frankly is one of my top 2 favorite podcasts of all times, the Moth Storytelling podcast, the founder is a gentleman named George Dawes Green, who was a writer who comes from the South and came from a long history of storytelling on the front porch with moths flying around the porch light. And he, back in the 90s, started gathering people in his living room to share stories. And then I believe in 1996 or 97, he created a nonprofit that became The Moth, which was dedicated to storytelling. And if you're not familiar, again, with the podcast, I highly recommend it. It has a global reach. I don't know what continent, I think every single continent, with the exception of Antarctica. I know there are stories about visiting Antarctica, but I don't think there have been any recorded there. But there have been beautiful, transformational, empowering moth story events on every continent in the world. And it has brought healing and transformation in so many beautiful and powerful ways. So why am I sharing that? I'm sharing that because it was a simple impulse to recreate something precious from his own life, which was that history of spending southern nights on the front porch with friends, telling stories, that this incredible worldwide phenomenon was created, this incredible ripple effect. So each of these people that I have shared about have had a profound ripple effect. And I am certainly someone who has aspired to have a profound ripple effect. And in ways, this podcast is an effort to do that. It is a form of creative expression. It's also a form of service. That is the intent anyway. And it is a form of self-love, frankly. And I just want to name, with the exception of George Dawes Green, each of these women emerged and began creating after their second Saturn return. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the concept of Saturn return, but suffice to say that our Saturn return is a passage we each experience when the planet Saturn returns to the place in the sky where it was at the time of our birth. So if we live long enough, we go through a few Saturn returns in the course of our life. We go through the first one between the ages of 27 and 30. We go through a second one in our late 50s as we're approaching 60. And then if we live long enough, we go through a third later in our 80s as we approach 90. And Saturn is a bit of a taskmaster, and it is the planet that makes sure we are on track. And the first Saturn return has a whole lot to do with, are we on track with our life purpose? And as I understand it and have lived through it, our second Saturn return is a revisiting of that, and it is a clearing out of anything that gets in the way, moving forward in the way we are intended to do for the next passage of Saturn around the sun to return back to the place in the sky where it was at the time in our birth. And the significance of that, I will say, I certainly have worked with a number of women who have lived through, are living through their second Saturn return. In fact, I have an interview coming up. Our next guest, Marion Rose, her interview will be coming out on the 7th of November, is right in the heat of her Saturn return. And it can be a time of immense dissolving and falling away. And I can only speak for myself. But it was the time where I felt the most profound sense of being in the chrysalis and dissolving into the goo. And anything that I had previously thought about, in some ways, who I was, what I was meant to be doing with my life, just any sense of direction was dissolving and falling away. And for many years, as I said, I have aspired to be of service in a profound way and to really reach as far as I possibly can. And one of my realizations during my Saturn return was that if the only thing I do in this life is to love myself, and to learn to love myself and to profoundly love myself, that would be enough. And I could recognize and I could see that part of my ambition to be of service in a significant way, in a profound way, there were aspects of it that were rooted in my ego needs to be worthwhile, to be worthy, to have my life mean something and be of value. And while at this point I do see the value in making my contribution, there was something important for me in coming to that recognition. The most important thing for me to do was to come back to my relationship with myself and to really embrace and love myself as fully as I possibly could. And so this journey of the Crone Codes and this podcast, because as I've said before, I did have a previous podcast, Trust Your Sacred Feminine Flow, that I began in 2016 and I completed in 2021. So these two podcasts bookmarked my Saturn return. And so as I'm emerging, as I am beginning the journey of sharing the second podcast, in a way, it can't help but come from a very different place in me. But one of the most significant pieces is the fullness and the love and the care I feel for myself. Also, I have a much greater sense of clarity and direction and purpose. And it's an act of both creative expression and service. A call to share the wisdom of my years and a call to connect women like you with sources that are meaningful for your journey and with people who I interview that I feel have important wisdom teachings and codes to share with you as well. So, all that being said, coming back to our third acts and late bloomers, I want to speak to you in particular if you have been unclear about what you're meant to do, I want to speak to you if you feel like there's something more you're yearning to express in the world, or perhaps that God is calling you to embody or to share, whether it is in a simple format, like George Dawes Green, beginning The Moth, just gathering people in his living room to tell stories, or whether it is to write the book, to finally write the book that you know you're meant to write. Or perhaps it's to offer yoga or to begin sharing ecstatic dance in your area. There can be so many things. Society is sending a constant message to us. And certainly if you have friends, or if you're someone who has been living a more traditional life, I would say similar to Rebecca Lattimer, although her life was not super traditional, but say, for example, you're surrounded by people who have been in the corporate world or who have been employed at a job, who are looking at this later stage of life as a time to retire and kick back and put their feet up and travel the world or enjoy life. And there is nothing wrong with that at all. However, from what I have seen and understand, that most of those people, once they kind of get that out of their system a little bit, do return to the point of wanting to be of service in some way or wanting to participate in something meaningful. So today's episode is really a stand for that and a reminder that you get to have that there is a beautiful ripple effect that happens in the world. And again, not from the ego perspective of that's how we're going to earn our worthiness in this life, that we're going to create something profound or meaningful or great. But it is that both and of by loving yourself and committing to expressing creatively in whatever form that looks like for you, which could be through volunteerism, it could be through your church, it could be through creating a summer camp for children, or whatever the case may be. I am here as a reminder and a stand for you to trust that vision of your heart and your soul and those yearnings to create something or to be present in the world in a different way. You do not have to be complicit or surrender to the narrative of now's the time to kick back and work on your pickleball and your Sudoku, or however you say it. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you don't have to do it the traditional way. You may just be getting started like Laura Ingalls Wilder, like Rebecca Lattimer, and like Louise Hay. You might just be getting started. And it might snowball into a $100 million franchise, or it might snowball into a legacy that has a profound impact on the world. And if what it does is it embraces you with love and it gives other people permission to do the same thing, and that is the entirety of what is completed through that, that is way more than enough. It's way more than enough. So, my dear, as we bring this to a close, one of the things that I personally love to do is to support people in their visions of creating or birthing what is wanting to come through them. I do offer consultations and one-on-one work that can provide a framework, a structure, a support, a sounding board, and also the assistance to move through what frequently is the inner layers of whether it's resistance, fear, old beliefs, whatever it might be that would tell you this is not a good idea. You don't want to take this risk. You don't want to get out of your comfort zone. You can be like Susie Q down the street and play pickleball every day or play cards every day or whatever the case may be. So I will put a link in the show notes if you're interested in getting some one-on-one support. I'm here for that. I'm a stand for that. I am here for you. And until we meet again, I want to remind you, whether you are making ripples or big waves in this world, that you are love and you are loved. Thank you for joining us today on the Crone Codes podcast. If you appreciated what was shared, please rate, review, subscribe, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to go deeper into the Crone Codes with curated bonus content created just for you, join our Crone Codes members community on Substack and receive prompts, tools, and resources for your wise woman journey.